Hanun hor yevortvo yevogwin sirpo. Amen. I think that a lot of the time when we try to get to know someone, when we try to learn about their personality, we focus most of the time on their preferences, the things that they like, the things that they do. Maybe we focus on the genres of music that they like to listen to, the types of books that they like to read, the types of movies that they like to go and see, the types of activities that they like to do in their free time. Although, of course, getting to know people's preferences does help us get to know a person, I think equally as much, sometimes, it's important to get to know people's dislikes, the things that they don't like, the things that make them uncomfortable, and maybe even the things that they fear. So to give an example, one of my likes happens to be one of my Yeretskins' dislikes, and that is heights. I love going on roller coasters, going on any ride that you might find at Six Flags, for example. Actually, we did that a couple of weeks, me with some of the altar servers. I love that type of stuff, even sometimes jumping out of airplanes. Yeretskin, however, absolutely hates it. She doesn't want to even look at a tall roller coaster. It's one of the things that brings a lot of fear and anxiety to her. And I think that a lot of times it's interesting the ways that one of kind of our likes, one of the things that we love might end up being the fear or an anxiety-inducing experience in another. Well, one of my anxiety-inducing moments and experiences is any time when I'm driving in the car and I don't know where I'm going. This is an example of where one of Yeretskin's comfort areas is one of my discomfort areas. I'm the type of person that always puts the GPS on, even if I know exactly where I'm going. Even, let's say, 3 to 4 months into being here at the church, every day that I would drive to work, I would put my GPS on, even though I knew the way. I don't like the feeling of being lost. I don't like the feeling of having lost my way. And maybe there are particular moments in my life that explain this. One in particular that I can think of was when I was doing my study abroad in France. And I decided, it was within the first week I think, I decided to go for a run. And maybe that was my first mistake. Maybe as an Armenian, I'm not really built to go for runs. But anyway, I decided to go for a run. And I thought that I was following my path pretty clearly that I had laid out in advance. But eventually, about 3 miles out, I had no clue where I was. I was lost in the middle of a foreign country. And this was before this was right before the point where cell phone access and smartphone utilization was optimized. So there was no hope of just using my cell phone to get me back home. And I remember the intense feeling of anxiety, of confusion, of panic, being disoriented, not knowing where I was. Not only not knowing where I was, but being in a foreign country. Thankfully, as I was all turned around trying to find my way, a truck driver ended up seeing that I was lost and graciously decided to give me a ride home. And the feeling of relief when that man ended up kind of calling me out and just asking if I wanted a ride was so immense. It was like a weight had been lifted off of my shoulders. And in today's gospel reading, we hear Christ talking about those who are lost. But he's not talking about, of course, being lost on a journey on the road. He's talking about people who are lost in their journeys of life. We hear a very clear command from Christ that if a man has 100 sheep and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99 on the mountain and go in search of the one that went astray? We hear Christ using the analogy, as he does many times, of a shepherd who's watching over his flock, for a comparison to what he does with his people. That even though he has 99 sheep, he's willing to put them aside for the sake of the one who has been lost. And I find it very interesting that this gospel reading is on this Sunday. And this gospel reading comes to us from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18. And last week's gospel reading came to us from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 17. And so we have a continuation, in a sense, from the story from last week. And throughout the week we had other parts of Matthew 17 leading us to today. But for some reason, the church fathers in their wisdom had us land on this particular gospel reading on the week after the Transfiguration. I think that this is important. I think that they're calling us to read these two passages in parallel. Last week we gathered together, or I didn't, you all gathered together, but I watched you from home, to celebrate the Feast of the Transfiguration, the feast where the disciples, three of them, Peter, James, and John, were brought up the mountain to be able to see Christ in all of his glory, to be able to see who Christ truly was, to be able to see that beyond the appearance of Christ being an ordinary man, he truly was God. He truly was the one who had come to bring light to this world. But then the story continues. And just as the disciples went up the mountain with Christ, they also had to come back down the mountain. They wanted to stay there. They wanted to stay and even build tabernacles, dwelling places that they might stay there for a while, but Christ did not go this direction. Christ directed them to go back down the mountain. Once they had seen the light of Christ, once they had seen the clarity of seeing Christ in all of his glory, they were called to go down the mountain and to do what? To go and to find the lost sheep of Israel. After seeing the light that Christ had provided, they were to take that light to people who were in darkness. They were to bring that light and to share it with others who needed it most. The light was not simply for their own benefit. It was not for their own spirituality, for their own personal relationship with God. The light that they were shown up on the mountain was meant for a purpose, and that purpose was to be shared with others, with those who need it most. It's very interesting in today's gospel reading. Many times in the Gospels, like I said, Christ uses the analogy of a shepherd and his sheep. Of course, most famously, he says, I am the good shepherd, right? But in today's gospel reading, he doesn't say who the shepherd is in the story. The most, obvious interpretation would be that Christ is the shepherd, like he's called himself in other parts of the story, that Christ is the one that leaves the 99 on the mountain and goes out into the world to find the lost sheep and to bring them home. But I think that sometimes when we don't get clarity in the story, we may be called to read the story from a couple of different angles. In the Armenian church, we call, and in all of the churches, we call the head of the church the hoviv, the pastor, the shepherd. And that's not a mistake. That's not accidental. And of course, in some ways, we're meant to look at passages like this when we hear that the pastor, that the shepherd, that the hoviv is the one who's supposed to go out into the world and to find the lost sheep. That my primary job as a pastor is not to tend to those who have not left, but to go out into the world and to find those who need to come home. But even beyond this, Christ is calling each and every one of us who have all had the benefit of coming into this sanctuary and seeing the light of God and seeing the hope of the gospel and seeing the way that God might transform us in our lives, having the privilege to come to this holy Badarak and to see the light of God every single week. Our role as Christians is to not stay up on this mountain. Our job as Christians is to go and to find those lost sheep. So often, I think especially in the Armenian church, we fall victim to be insulated. We like to have our little communities that have our Armenians in them, and we like to kind of just deal with our own, right? We don't really like to go out of our comfort zone. What if someone were to walk in here that didn't meet the appearances that we were expecting? How would we greet them? Would we greet them welcomingly, or would we greet them suspiciously? I don't know. I think for each of us that may be a different answer. However, Christ makes it very clear that our job is specifically for those people who do not find themselves in the sanctuary. And I think that it's just true that we cannot call ourselves a church if all of the work that we do is simply within these walls. If we aren't going out into the world, if we aren't going and bringing the light of God's love and the light that's shone on the face of Christ during the Transfiguration out into the world, we cannot call ourselves true Christians. We cannot call ourselves the one who are following the man who told us to leave those 99 on the mountain and go and to find the lost sheep. So I think that today's gospel reading and the past 2 weeks calls us to a question. Are we seeking those who are lost? Are we seeking those who may not conform to what we imagine our parishioners to be in this community? Are we going out and actively trying to bring in people who are lost, who are lonely, who are in pain, who may be a little bit rough around the edges? Are we actively trying to seek those people who are lost? That one sheep that Christ thinks is more precious than the 99 who needed no saving. I call on each of us and myself, let us all reflect on this question today. I'm hoping that as we go into the fall, I really, in my own ministry, I want to but to focus my attention a lot more on community outreach, what we can be doing for the community outside. Our first year, we had some wonderful Christian education programs. Those are important. We need to come and we need to see the light. However, we also need to take the next step. Let us all find ways that we might be the shepherds that go out and search for those sheep. Sometimes those sheep may be even within our own community, that there may be people who are sitting here today who, although they are here, they are lost. Let us be the source of light to these people. May we show the light of Christ in all that we do. May we come to see it and to reflect it to all of those around. And may we truly be the way that those who are lost might find their way back home, so that they can offer praise and glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, now and always, and unto the ages of ages. Amen.